It started like any other day at the dusty old gas station on the edge of town. The place was nothing special, just a small convenience store with a few aging pumps out front and a flickering neon sign that read open. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and gold. Long shadows stretched across the cracked asphalt, and a faint breeze carried the scent of gasoline and sun-baked concrete. At Pump 7, a lone figure stood, calm and composed, as if he were just another traveler passing through. He wore a faded hoodie, the kind that had seen better days, and a pair of jeans frayed at the edges. His boots were scuffed, his hands steady as he filled up the tank of an old truck that looked as worn and weathered as he did. To anyone watching, he didn't stand out. There was nothing flashy about him, no shiny watch, no loud voice, no signs of wealth or importance. He seemed like the kind of man you'd pass on the street without giving a second thought. But if you looked closer, there was something different about him. The way he moved was deliberate, each action purposeful and precise. His eyes, partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, scanned the area with a calm awareness, as though he were seeing more than most people would. This man carried a secret, one that would have shocked anyone who cared to ask. He wasn't just another guy filling up his truck. He had faced more danger in a single week than most people faced in a lifetime. He had seen things, done things that left marks not on his skin, but in his mind. Marks that made him move the way he did, quiet, unassuming, but ready. The gas station was quiet, almost eerily so. The hum of the fluorescent lights above the pumps and the occasional distant chirp of a bird were the only sounds. The clerk inside the convenience store sat behind the counter, half asleep, the soft murmur of a radio keeping him company. Then, the stillness shattered. The rumble of engines tore through the quiet like a storm rolling in. It wasn't just one or two motorcycles, it was 5, their guttural roars echoing off the surrounding buildings as they pulled into the lot. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath the weight of their arrival. The bikers rolled in like they owned the place, parking their machines in a perfect, intimidating line near the pumps. Each bike was a beast of polished chrome and roaring power, their frames reflecting the dying sunlight like fire on metal. The riders dismounted one by one, leather jackets creaking, boots clinking against the asphalt. They were loud, too loud. Their laughter carried across the lot, harsh and mocking, as if the world were their playground and everyone else just a part of the scenery. One of them lit a cigarette, the flame of his lighter sparking against the fading light. Another cracked his knuckles loudly, the sound sharp and deliberate. At the center of the group was the leader, a man with a wild beard, dark sunglasses, and a cocky grin that screamed trouble. He surveyed the gas station like a king surveying his kingdom, his every move exuding arrogance. His jacket was adorned with patches and symbols, marks of a gang that had long stopped caring about the rules. The lone figure at Pump 7 didn't react. He kept his gaze on the nozzle in his hand, his posture relaxed, as if the arrival of 5 bikers meant nothing to him. He didn't flinch, didn't turn to look, didn't show even the slightest hint of concern. But the bikers noticed him. The leader nudged one of his men, jerking his chin toward the man at the pump. "Look at this guy," he said, loud enough for his voice to carry. "What's he think he's doing here? Doesn't look like he belongs." His gang laughed, the kind of laughter that wasn't meant to be friendly. It was taunting, a sound meant to establish dominance. They started walking toward him, boots crunching on the asphalt. The leader was the first to speak again, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, old man," he called out, loud and grating. "Nice truck you got there. Too bad it's in our spot." The man at the pump didn't respond right away. He finished filling his tank, clicked the nozzle back into place, and replaced the cap on the truck's fuel tank. Only then did he look up, his eyes calm and steady, meeting the leader's gaze without hesitation. "Didn't see your name on it," he said, his voice low but clear. The bikers exchanged glances, their laughter growing louder. The leader's grin widened, but there was something darker in his expression now. "Oh, we don't need to put our name on it," he said, stepping closer. "Everybody knows. This is our territory." The man didn't move. He stood there, his hands resting at his sides, as if the gang of leather-clad bikers meant no more to him than the breeze that ruffled his hoodie. The leader took another step forward, close enough now that the smell of cigarette smoke and leather hung heavy in the air. "You've got some guts, I'll give you that," he said, his tone turning colder. "But you're in the wrong place to test 'em." The others began to fan out, forming a loose circle around the man and his truck. One of them picked up a gas station receipt that had blown onto the pavement and crumpled it in his hand, tossing it aside with exaggerated force. Another leaned casually against the pump, his eyes never leaving the man in the hoodie. The clerk inside the convenience store glanced up from his radio, his face pale as he noticed the bikers. He sank lower behind the counter, pretending not to see what was happening. Outside, the leader tilted his head, his grin turning into a sneer. "You don't look like much," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Bet you're just passing through, right? Not from around here. Thought you'd fill up and be on your way." The man in the hoodie didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any words could have been. And that silence, it unnerved them. The leader narrowed his eyes, leaning in closer. The scent of cheap whiskey lingered on his breath. "You deaf or just dumb?" he growled, a smirk playing on his lips as his gang snickered behind him. "I'm talking to you, old man." Still, the man in the hoodie didn't react. He adjusted the strap of his truck's fuel cap with calm precision, like someone finishing an ordinary chore. His movements were deliberate, almost methodical, as if he were entirely uninterested in the gang of bikers surrounding him. One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with a shaved head and a patch-covered vest, stepped forward. He flicked a cigarette onto the ground, grinding it into the asphalt with his boot. "Hey, boss, maybe he's too scared to talk," he jeered, his voice cracking slightly, though he tried to mask it with bravado. "Scared?" The leader laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed in the stillness. "Oh, I don't think so. I think he's just stupid." The group erupted into laughter again, loud and mocking. Their voices bounced off the walls of the gas station, sending a flock of birds scattering from a nearby telephone wire. The clerk inside peeked nervously through the smudged glass window, his hand hovering near the phone, but he didn't pick it up. He'd seen enough trouble come through these parts to know better than to intervene. "Listen," the leader said, his tone shifting to mock friendliness, "we're feeling generous today. Why don't you hand over your wallet, keys, and whatever else you've got in that truck of yours? We'll let you walk out of here with your life." The man in the hoodie finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't think that's going to happen." The laughter stopped abruptly, the air thick with tension. The leader's grin faded, replaced by a sneer of disbelief. "What did you just say?" The man didn't repeat himself. Instead, he reached for the nozzle, pulling it from the pump and securing it back into place with a soft click. He moved with an unhurried confidence, as if he hadn't just refused a gang of 5 intimidating bikers. "Hey," the wiry biker shouted, his voice higher pitched this time. He stepped closer, raising a finger to jab at the man's chest. "You don't talk to us like that, you hear?" Before the finger made contact, the man shifted slightly. It was a subtle movement, but there was a sharpness to it, a precision that made the biker freeze mid-motion. For a brief moment, it was as if time itself had paused. The man's gaze, calm yet unnervingly steady, locked onto the wiry bikers. The younger man hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of that look. The leader noticed the hesitation and stepped in, shoving his gang member aside. "Oh, I see what this is," he said, his tone mocking. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh? Let me guess, you're one of those wannabe heroes. Seen a few too many action movies. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. His silence, once mistaken for weakness, now seemed deliberate, calculated. It was a silence that demanded attention. The leader took a step closer, invading the man's personal space. He was taller, broader, and clearly used to intimidating others into submission. But this time, something felt different. The man in the hoodie didn't flinch, didn't back down. Instead, he stood his ground, his eyes unwavering. "You've got guts," the leader said, his voice low and dangerous. "But guts only get you so far." He raised his hand, reaching for the man's hood. Whether he meant to yank it back or simply assert his dominance wasn't clear. What was clear was the man's reaction, or rather, the lack of one. He didn't move, didn't try to stop him. He just stood there, his gaze locked on the leader's face. When the hood fell back, the gang got their first proper look at the man. His hair was close-cropped, his face weathered but not old, with sharp features and a faint scar running along his jawline. But it wasn't his appearance that gave them pause, it was his eyes. They were cold, calculating, and oddly calm, like the eyes of someone who'd seen things most people couldn't even imagine. The leader hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for the rest of the gang to notice. The wiry biker shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his companions. The others exchanged uncertain looks, their earlier bravado beginning to waver. "What's the matter?" the man in the hoodie asked, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Not what you expected." The leader scowled, his pride stinging. "I don't care who you are," he spat. "You're in the wrong place at the wrong time." The man tilted his head again, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's funny," he said, his tone almost conversational. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." The leader of the group, a towering man with a wild, unkempt beard and a cruel smirk that seemed permanently etched onto his face, strutted toward the pumps like he owned the place. His boots clunked heavily against the asphalt, each step deliberate and slow, meant to draw attention. Behind him, his gang trailed like hyenas following their alpha, exchanging knowing smirks and low chuckles as they approached. "Hey, old man," the leader called out, his gravelly voice cutting through the hum of the gas station. He pointed at the Marine's old truck, his smirk widening into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice ride. Too bad it's in our spot." The Marine, still standing by the pump, didn't look up right away. His focus remained on his truck as if he hadn't heard the man. But when he finally glanced up, his expression was calm, unreadable. His eyes, sharp and steady, met the leader's with a cool detachment. "Didn't see your name on it," he replied, his voice measured and even. Without waiting for a response, he returned his focus to the pump, his movements slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The gang erupted in laughter, the kind that wasn't really about humor. It was sharp, mocking, and loud, meant to rattle nerves. But the Marine didn't flinch, didn't even glance in their direction again. The leader's grin faltered for a split second before returning, his ego clearly bruised by the lack of reaction. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the leader said, stepping closer. His tone carried a dangerous edge now, one that hinted at trouble. "But you're in the wrong place to test him." The gang began to fan out, forming a loose circle around the Marine and his truck. The sound of their boots scraping against the asphalt filled the air as they took up positions, each movement calculated to assert dominance. One of them, a wiry man with a shaved head and a sneer that seemed permanently fixed to his face, spat on the ground near the Marine's feet. Another, a burly guy with a tattoo snaking up his neck, cracked his knuckles loudly, the sound echoing ominously. The Marine didn't react. He finished filling his tank, replaced the nozzle, and tightened the cap with a soft click. His movements were so unhurried, so casual, that it only seemed to fuel the biker's irritation. It was as if he were completely unfazed by their presence, like they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience on his otherwise uneventful day. The leader stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he was standing just a foot away. The scent of cigarette smoke and cheap cologne clung to him, mingling with the faint smell of gasoline in the air. "You think you're funny, huh?" he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I'll ask you one more time, who gave you the right to park here?" The Marine finally turned to face him fully, his posture relaxed but his gaze unwavering. "I didn't realize I needed permission," he said, his tone polite but firm. There was no trace of fear in his voice, no hesitation. It was the kind of calm that made people uneasy, the kind that hinted at something deeper, something dangerous. The leader's smirk twisted into a sneer. He wasn't used to being talked back to, especially not by someone who looked as ordinary as this man. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice rising slightly. "This is our turf. We run this town, and people like you. You don't get to walk in and do whatever you want." The wiry biker with the shaved head stepped forward, emboldened by the leader's words. "Maybe he's deaf," he said, his sneer widening. "Or just stupid." He jabbed a finger in the Marine's direction, the gesture aggressive and taunting. "What do you think, old man? You stupid or just looking for trouble?" The Marine's gaze flicked to the wiry biker for a moment before returning to the leader. He said nothing, his silence speaking louder than any words could. There was something in his eyes, something cold and unyielding, that made the wiry biker hesitate. He shifted uncomfortably, his sneer faltering. The leader noticed the hesitation and barked a short laugh. "Don't let him scare you," he said, clapping the wiry biker on the shoulder. "He's just another washed-up nobody. Probably thinks that truck of his makes him tough." One of the other bikers, a younger man with long hair tied back in a greasy ponytail, chuckled and pointed at the Marine's truck. "Looks like it's held together with duct tape and prayers," he said, earning a round of laughter from the group. "Maybe we should do him a favor and put it out of its misery." The tension in the air thickened as the gang's taunts grew louder, more pointed. They were testing him, pushing boundaries, waiting for a reaction. But the Marine remained still, his expression unchanged. It was as if their words didn't reach him, as if he were entirely unaffected by their presence. "Look at him," the leader said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Standing there like he's better than us. Like he doesn't know what's about to happen." The Marine finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You done?" he asked, his tone almost bored. The leader blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. "What did you say?" "I said," the Marine repeated, his gaze locking onto the leader's, "are you done?" The gang fell silent, the weight of the Marine's words hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The leader's smirk faltered again, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the Marine saw it. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of men who realized too late that they'd underestimated their opponent. The leader's eyes narrowed as he stepped even closer, towering over the Marine. He was used to getting his way, and the Marine's calm defiance was scratching at his pride like sandpaper. Around him, the gang shifted, their earlier smirks now tinged with uncertainty. They didn't understand it, but there was something about this man, something that felt off. "You think you're tough, huh?" the leader growled. His voice was quieter now, but somehow more threatening, like a coiled snake ready to strike. "Standing there all cool like you're untouchable. Let me tell you something." He jabbed a thick, calloused finger into the Marine's chest. "Nobody messes with us. Nobody." The Marine didn't flinch. He stood there, solid as a rock, letting the leader's words wash over him like waves breaking against a cliff. When the leader jabbed him again, harder this time, he finally spoke. "I'd think twice about that," he said, his voice low and calm. There was no anger in it, No fear, just a quiet confidence that made the leader hesitate for the briefest of moments. Think twice about what, the leader sneered, his bravado kicking back in. He turned to his gang, throwing his arms wide in mock disbelief. You hear that? Old man thinks he can tell me what to do. The gang laughed nervously, their earlier confidence now feeling forced. The wiry biker with the shaved head shot a glance at the Marine, his unease growing. Something about the way the man spoke or didn't speak was getting under his skin. Maybe he's packing, the wiry one muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. The leader turned on him, scowling. What's the matter, Jake? You scared of this guy? His voice was dripping with disdain, and the wiry biker bristled, straightening up. Me? Scared? Nah, Jake said quickly, his sneer returning, though his voice wavered slightly. Just saying, guy like him, you never know. The leader laughed again, but it was shorter this time, less certain. Yeah, well, even if he is, what's he gonna do? He's outnumbered 5-1. The Marine's faint smile returned, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he adjusted his stance slightly, his movements unhurried and deliberate. It was a subtle shift, but it spoke volumes. Anyone paying close attention would have noticed the way his weight balanced evenly on both feet, the way his hands hung loose and ready at his sides. It was the kind of stance that came from years of training, years of knowing exactly what to do in a fight. Jake noticed it. So did the burly biker with the neck tattoo, who was now shifting his weight from foot to foot like he couldn't quite get comfortable. Boss, he said, his voice low, maybe we should just let this one go. Guy's not worth the trouble. The leader whipped around, glaring at him. Let it go? Are you kidding me? You think I'm gonna let some nobody walk in here and disrespect us like this? The burly biker looked down, muttering something under his breath. The leader turned back to the Marine, his fists clenching at his sides. You've got one last chance, he said, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. Hand over your keys and get out of here, or we're gonna have a problem. The Marine tilted his head slightly, as if considering the offer. Then he shrugged. Guess we've got a problem, he said. The leader's face turned a deep shade of red. Without warning, he lunged, grabbing for the Marine's shirt. But he didn't even make it halfway. The Marine moved so fast that it was almost impossible to follow. One moment, the leader's hand was reaching for him, and the next, the Marine had stepped to the side, grabbing the leader's wrist and twisting it in a way that made him yelp in pain. The gang froze, their mouths falling open in shock. None of them had seen the Marine move 1 second he'd been standing there, and the next, he had their leader on his knees, his arm bent at an awkward angle. You're gonna want to think real carefully about your next move, the Marine said quietly, his voice as calm as ever. His grip on the leader's wrist was firm but not cruel, as if he were holding back. Because I can promise you, it's not gonna end the way you think. The leader gritted his teeth, his face contorted with pain. Let me go, you son of a... The Marine applied just a little more pressure, and the leader's words cut off with a strangled gasp. Language, the Marine said, a faint hint of humor in his voice. There's a kid in the store. The gang exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They were the ones who were supposed to be in control, the ones who scared people into doing what they wanted. But now their leader was on his knees, and none of them seemed to know what to do. Jake took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised slightly. Hey, man, we don't want any trouble, he said, his voice cracking. Just let him go, and we'll leave, all right. The Marine looked at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might agree. Then he shook his head. Not yet, he said. First, we're gonna have a little chat. The leader groaned, his face pale with pain. You're dead, he hissed through gritted teeth. You hear me? You're a dead man. The Marine raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? He asked. There was no arrogance in his tone, no bravado. It was a genuine question, one that made the gang shiver. Because the truth was, they weren't sure. They weren't sure about anything anymore. The burly biker with the neck tattoo took a step forward, breaking the silence. You've got a mouth on you, he said, his tone low and menacing. Maybe we should shut it for you. The leader raised a hand, stopping him. Not yet, he said, his smirk returning. Let's give him one last chance. Hand over your keys, your wallet, and whatever else you've got in that truck, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here in one piece. The Marine tilted his head slightly, considering the offer. Then, to the gang's astonishment, he smiled a faint, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. It wasn't the kind of smile that conveyed humor or amusement. It was a different kind of smile, one that hinted at something the gang couldn't quite place. Something that made their bravado falter. I think I'll pass, the Marine said simply. The leader's smirk twisted into a snarl. Big mistake, he growled. The leader's sneer deepened, his bravado fueled by the chuckles of his gang. They thrived on intimidation, on the fear they saw in their victims' eyes. But this man wasn't giving them the satisfaction. He wasn't pleading, wasn't apologizing, and he definitely wasn't afraid. That unsettled them, though none would admit it out loud. The Marine's eyes scanned the group with a precision honed over years. He wasn't looking at their tattoos or the grease stains on their jeans, he was cataloging their movements, their habits, their weaknesses. The wiry one kept shifting his weight to his left leg, he'd be slow on his right. The burly guy was heavy, powerful, but clumsy, a strong enough shove would unbalance him. And the leader? He was all bark, his strength rooted in the loyalty of his pack. Alone, he'd crumble like sand. The leader waved a hand, gesturing for one of his guys to step forward. The biker, stocky and tattooed from neck to knuckles, smirked as he squared up to the Marine. Let's see that tough guy act up close, he said, cracking his knuckles. The Marine didn't respond. His stillness was unnerving, his calmness like a storm about to break. The biker lunged, aiming a punch at the Marine's midsection. It was fast, but not fast enough. In a blur of movement, the Marine sidestepped, grabbed the biker's wrist, and twisted. The biker let out a yelp as he stumbled forward, his momentum turned against him. Before he could react, the Marine's knee connected with his ribs, sending him sprawling onto the ground, gasping for air. The gang froze. That wasn't supposed to happen. The Marine adjusted his hoodie, his expression unchanged. You should sit this one out, he said, his voice calm but firm. The leader's face darkened, his smirk replaced with a scowl. Lucky shot, he spat. Jake, get him up. The wiry biker hesitated before stepping forward to help his fallen friend. He shot the Marine a wary glance as he hoisted the groaning man to his feet. Boss, maybe we should just let this guy go, he muttered under his breath. The leader whipped around, his eyes blazing. Let him go? Are you kidding me? This isn't about him anymore, it's about respect. He turned back to the Marine, his fists clenched. You think you're smart, huh? Think you're better than us? The Marine tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. I think you're making a mistake, he said. The leader barked a harsh laugh. Oh, I'll show you a mistake. He pointed at another gang member, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek. Vinny, teach this guy a lesson. Vinny cracked his neck and stepped forward, flexing his hands. He circled the Marine like a predator sizing up its prey. You should have walked away, he said, grinning. The Marine didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes followed Vinny's movements, calculating every step, every twitch of muscle. Vinny darted forward, feinting left before swinging a right hook. The Marine blocked it effortlessly, his arm moving with the precision of a machine. In the same motion, he grabbed Vinny's wrist and twisted, forcing him to his knees. With a firm but controlled push, he sent Vinny sprawling next to his fallen comrade. The gang was silent now. Their confidence was cracking, the cracks spreading like spiderwebs. The leader's jaw tightened. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The Marine didn't answer. Instead, he pulled up his sleeve, revealing the edge of a tattoo, a series of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to the bikers but everything to those who knew. It was a mark of service, of sacrifice, of a life spent in places most people couldn't imagine. "Let me guess," the leader sneered, though his voice wavered. "You think that makes you special? You think that means something?" The Marine's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "It means I've faced worse than you on my worst day." For the first time, the leader faltered. The bravado that had carried him this far was failing him, the weight of the Marine's words pressing down like a storm cloud. But he wasn't ready to back down, not yet. "All right," he said, his voice sharper now, desperate. "You wanna play the hero? Fine. Let's see how tough you are when it's all of us against you." He nodded to the rest of the gang. "Take him down." The bikers hesitated, glancing at each other. They'd seen what this man could do, how easily he'd taken down two of their own. But loyalty or fear bound them to their leader. Slowly, reluctantly, they moved to surround the Marine. The Marine stood his ground, his body relaxed but ready. His training was kicking in now, his mind sharpening like a blade. He wasn't in a gas station anymore, he was back in the field, outnumbered and outgunned but never outmatched. One of the bikers lunged, and the Marine spun, deflecting the attack and sending the man stumbling into another. Another came at him from the side, but the Marine ducked and swept his leg, knocking him off balance. The movements were fluid, almost graceful, each one precise and purposeful. Within moments, the gang was on the ground, groaning and clutching their injuries. The Marine stood in the center, untouched, his breathing steady. The leader stared, his face pale. What are you?" he whispered. The Marine took a step closer, and the leader stumbled back, his bravado crumbling completely. "You had your chance to walk away," the Marine said, his voice calm but firm. "Now you're gonna listen." He leaned in, his gaze piercing. "There's a kid in that store. A family in that car over there. This isn't your playground. You don't get to hurt people just because you think you can." The leader nodded frantically, his tough guy act completely gone. All right," he stammered. "We'll go. We're done." The Marine straightened, watching as the bikers scrambled to their feet. They hurried to their bikes, their earlier swagger replaced with a desperate need to get away. As the engines roared to life and the gang sped off, the Marine turned back to his truck. He finished pumping his gas, the faintest smile on his lips. Behind him, the gas station attendant peeked out from behind the counter, wide-eyed. "That was incredible," he said. The Marine shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Just another day," he said. But as he climbed into his truck and drove away, the faint outline of a sniper tattoo on his forearm caught the light, hinting at the truth of who he really was and why he'd been able to handle the situation so effortlessly. The gas station fell silent again, except for the faint hum of the fuel pumps and the rustle of the wind. The Marine leaned back against his truck for a moment, his posture calm but his senses still sharp. Situations like these could turn unpredictable fast, he'd learned that in his years overseas. And while the bikers had retreated, their bruised egos could easily bring them back for round two. He scanned the lot. The gas station attendant, a skinny kid who couldn't have been older than 19, was still crouched behind the counter, his wide eyes just barely peeking over the edge. A mother with her two young children was hurrying back into her car, locking the doors with trembling hands. This wasn't supposed to happen here. The Marine exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't the kind of battle he'd signed up for, but trouble seemed to find him no matter how far he went. He climbed into his truck and reached for the ignition, ready to leave the chaos behind. But then, the rumble came back. The low growl of motorcycle engines echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The Marine's hand froze on the key. He didn't need to see them to know they were coming back. And they weren't alone this time. The gas station attendant stepped out from behind the counter, his face pale. Hey, you think they're... Yeah, the Marine cut him off, his voice steady. Get inside. Lock the doors. The kid hesitated, but the look in the Marine's eyes left no room for argument. He darted back into the store, flipping the lock and disappearing behind the counter again. The rumble grew louder until the bikers rolled back into the lot, their numbers doubled. At least 10 of them now, their faces set with determination and vengeance. At the front of the pack was the leader, his sneer back in place, though his eyes betrayed the sting of his earlier humiliation. Thought you'd get the last word, huh? The leader called out, his voice booming over the engines. Guess again. The Marine stepped out of his truck, his movements calm, deliberate. He didn't say a word as the gang dismounted their bikes, surrounding him once again. Listen up, tough guy, the leader continued, gesturing to his crew. You think you can humiliate us and just drive off? Nah. You're gonna pay for that. One of the new bikers, a burly man with a scar running down his arm, cracked his knuckles and grinned. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said, echoing the leader's earlier taunt. But guts only get you so far. The Marine's eyes flicked over the group, assessing each one with the same meticulous precision he'd used before. These weren't just barroom brawlers. Some of these men moved with the confidence of experience. Ex-military, maybe. Mercenaries. It didn't matter. You brought back up, the Marine said, his tone neutral. Smart. But you still don't have what it takes. The leader's smirk faltered, just for a moment. Big talk for a guy who's outnumbered. The Marine tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. Numbers don't win fights. Training does. That did it. The leader barked an order, and the bikers moved in. The first attacker rushed at him, swinging a chain. The Marine sidestepped, grabbing the chain mid-swing and using it to pull the man off balance. With a swift kick, he sent the biker sprawling to the ground. Another lunged from the side, aiming a crowbar at the Marine's ribs. The Marine ducked, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting it until the crowbar clattered to the pavement. A quick elbow to the chest sent the man stumbling backward. It was chaos. The bikers came at him from all sides, but the Marine moved like a force of nature, quick, calculated, unstoppable. Every move he made was efficient, designed to neutralize without unnecessary harm. He wasn't fighting to hurt them. He was fighting to end this. The leader hung back, watching as his men were systematically taken down. His confidence was eroding with every passing second, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking. Everyone stop. The remaining bikers hesitated, their momentum faltering. The Marine stood in the center of the chaos, breathing steadily. His hoodie was torn, his knuckles grazed, but his composure remained unshaken. The leader stepped forward, trying to muster what was left of his bravado. All right, he said, raising his hands. You've made your point. You're tough. But don't think this is over. The Marine took a step closer, his gaze boring into the leader. It's over when I say it's over, he said quietly. The leader swallowed hard, his earlier confidence completely gone. Leave, the Marine continued. And don't come back. The leader hesitated, glancing at his men. Most of them were on the ground, groaning in pain. The few who could still stand looked at him, waiting for his call. Finally, he nodded. Let's go, he muttered. The bikers began to retreat, limping back to their bikes and starting their engines. One by one, they rode off, the roar of their motorcycles fading into the distance. The Marine watched them go, his expression unreadable. He waited until the last bike disappeared over the horizon before turning back to his truck. The gas station attendant emerged cautiously, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Dude," he said, his voice shaking. "That was insane. You just took out, like, a dozen guys. Who even does that?" The Marine glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just a guy trying to pump his gas," he said. But as he climbed into his truck and drove away, the truth lingered in the air like the scent of gasoline. He wasn't just a guy. He was something more, something the bikers had underestimated. And he wasn't the kind of man who left loose ends. The leader's bravado cracked like a poorly built dam. His eyes widened as he struggled against the chain now coiled around his wrist. It wasn't just the iron grip that pinned him in place, it was the cold, calm look in the Marine's eyes. A look that told him he wasn't just dealing with any man. The Marine gave the chain a slight tug, pulling the leader closer. His hood slid back, revealing a chiseled jaw, a small scar near his temple, and eyes that didn't just look at you, they seemed to see through you. The bikers saw it now, this man wasn't someone who flinched or backed down. This was a man who had been through hell and come back stronger. "Listen closely," the Marine said, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "You don't know who you're messing with, but let me make it clear you don't want to find out." For a moment, the gas station was eerily quiet, save for the leader's labored breathing. The other bikers hesitated, glancing at each other. The confidence they had strutted in with was now replaced by unease. But there's always one who doesn't take a hint. A burly biker, his arms inked with skull tattoos, charged forward with a pipe raised high. He swung it with all his strength, aiming for the Marine's side. The Marine moved like a shadow. He stepped into the attack, his arm snapping up to block the swing. In a blur, his other hand shot out, striking the biker's wrist. The pipe clattered to the ground as the man stumbled back, clutching his hand in pain. Before he could recover, the Marine swept his legs out from under him, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Another biker lunged forward, this one with a knife. He jabbed, but the Marine sidestepped smoothly, grabbing the attacker's arm and twisting it. The knife fell with a metallic clang, and the Marine used the man's momentum against him, flipping him onto his back. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance, except this wasn't rehearsed. Every move was precise, deliberate. The Marine wasn't just reacting, he was predicting, controlling the flow of the fight. By now, 2 bikers were down and groaning on the ground. The others froze, their earlier cockiness replaced by fear. The Marine straightened, standing tall and calm in the midst of the chaos. He reached down, picking up a discarded motorcycle helmet. Holding it up for a moment, he tossed it toward the remaining bikers. It landed at their feet with a dull thud. "You want to test your luck?" he asked, his voice steady and unyielding. The bikers didn't answer. Their silence said enough. But the leader wasn't ready to admit defeat. Despite the chain still binding his wrist, he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Big man with big moves," he spat. "You think you're untouchable? You're just some guy in a gas station." The Marine's gaze hardened. He stepped closer, his presence looming like a storm. "I'm not just some guy," he said, his voice quiet but cutting. With his free hand, the Marine pushed up the sleeve of his hoodie, revealing a tattoo, a globe and anchor surrounded by the word Semper Fi. The leader's smirk vanished. His bravado crumbled as recognition dawned in his eyes. You're a Marine." The Marine didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the silence speak, the weight of it pressing down on everyone present. Then he said, "Not just a Marine. Sniper. Recon. And let me tell you something about guys like me we don't miss. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their confidence eroding further. Even the leader, bound and bruised, looked genuinely afraid now. "Look," the leader stammered, his earlier swagger replaced by a trembling voice. We didn't mean anything by it. Just having some fun, you know." The Marine's expression didn't change. "Fun? You call threatening people fun?" He gestured toward the gas station attendant, who was peeking out from behind the counter. "What about him? What about the woman and her kids who had to watch this?" The leader opened his mouth, but no words came out. The Marine leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Here's the deal. You leave. Now. And you don't come back. Ever. Because if I see any of you again, I won't just disarm you. I'll make sure you remember why you never should have come here in the first place." The bikers didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled to help their fallen comrades, dragging them to their bikes. The leader fumbled with the chain around his wrist until the Marine finally released it, shoving him back with just enough force to remind him who was in control. One by one, the motorcycles roared to life, and the gang sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and their shattered pride. The Marine stood there for a moment, watching until the last tail light disappeared into the horizon. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back toward the gas station. The attendant stepped out cautiously, his face a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Man," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know who you are, but that was incredible." The Marine gave a small smile, pulling his hood back up. "Just someone who knows how to handle himself." As he climbed back into his truck, the young mother from earlier rolled down her window, giving him a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded back, starting the engine. But as he pulled out of the lot, he couldn't help but glance at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't just a passerby, wasn't just a former Marine. He was someone who couldn't sit idly by when people needed help. And though he'd left the battlefield behind, the battlefield hadn't left him. This wasn't the first time trouble had found him. And it wouldn't be the last. The air seemed heavier as the dust settled. Inside the gas station, a few onlookers peered cautiously through windows and doors, their faces a mix of relief and astonishment. The Marine's calm demeanor had diffused the chaos, but his mind remained sharp, scanning the area to ensure the bikers were truly gone. The gas station attendant, a wiry young man in a grease-stained shirt, hesitated before stepping fully outside. His voice was shaky as he called out, "Hey, sir. Are you okay?" The Marine turned, his piercing eyes meeting the attendant's. "I'm fine," he said simply, his tone as steady as it had been throughout the ordeal. "Those guys," the attendant stammered, gesturing vaguely in the direction the bikers had fled. "They've been causing trouble around here for weeks. I've never seen anyone stand up to them like that." The Marine shrugged, his posture relaxed yet alert. "They just needed a reminder that they're not invincible." The attendant nodded, awe flickering across his face. "Well, you gave 'em that, all right. They won't forget you anytime soon." The Marine didn't respond immediately. His focus shifted to the pump where his truck was still parked. He walked over, replaced the nozzle, and closed the gas cap with precision, as if the confrontation moments ago hadn't disrupted him at all. But he wasn't done yet. As he moved toward the gas station entrance, the young mother from earlier approached him. She carried her toddler on one hip, the child clinging tightly to her. Her voice was soft but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." The Marine gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Just glad everyone's all right." She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Are Are you in law enforcement or something? He shook his head. No. Just someone who doesn't like bullies. She smiled faintly, nodding in understanding. Well, thank you. Truly. He inclined his head before stepping into the gas station. The attendant was behind the counter now, nervously fidgeting with a stack of receipts. He looked up as the Marine approached. They'll come back, you know, the attendant said, his voice barely above a whisper. They always do. And when they do, they'll be even angrier. The Marine leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. Do you have cameras here? The attendant gestured to a dusty corner where a single, outdated security camera was mounted. Yeah, but it's just for show. Doesn't even work anymore. The Marine nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then you need to make some changes. Start with real cameras, and maybe think about hiring security for busy hours. The attendant's face fell. I can't afford that. Business has been slow, and after what those guys did last week. The Marine raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I get it. Times are tough. But you can't let people like that take over your life. Stand your ground, even if it's just in small ways. They count on fear to get what they want. Don't give it to them. The attendant swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Yeah, you're right. Satisfied, the Marine pulled a folded bill from his pocket and slid it across the counter. For the damages, he said, nodding toward the scattered shelves and the pump area outside. The attendant's eyes widened. You don't have to. I know, the Marine interrupted. But I want to. As he stepped back outside, the Marine glanced around one last time, ensuring the area was secure. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower, casting a golden glow over the horizon. The mother was buckling her child into her car, offering him another nod of thanks as he passed. The elderly couple he'd noticed earlier waved hesitantly from their car, their gratitude clear in their eyes. He climbed into his truck, the leather seat creaking softly under his weight. With a turn of the key, the engine roared to life. But before he pulled out, he took a moment to breathe deeply, his hands resting on the steering wheel. Memories flooded his mind, missions in faraway lands, the weight of his rifle, the camaraderie of his brothers in arms. Those experiences had shaped him, made him the man he was today. But they also came with a burden, one he carried quietly. As he drove away, the gas station grew smaller in his rearview mirror, but the lessons left behind lingered. The people there had seen more than just a fight, they'd witnessed resilience, a refusal to back down in the face of intimidation. And the Marine? He'd reminded himself of something important, too. Even in the quiet corners of life, far from the battlefields of his past, there were still battles worth fighting. He wasn't looking for trouble. But if it found him again, he knew exactly what to do. By the time the gas station owner finally worked up the courage to step out from behind the counter, the bikers had already roared off into the distance. Their engines sputtered with more anger than power, their retreat a noisy reminder of their humiliation. The leader, his pride bruised even more than his body, limped back to his bike before they left. He muttered curses under his breath, his swagger gone and replaced with a stiff, defeated shuffle. The gas station lot, once tense with hostility, now felt strangely calm. The scent of spilled gasoline hung in the air, mixed with the faint whiff of burnt rubber from the biker's hasty exit. The Marine stood by his truck, brushing the dust off his jeans as though the entire encounter had been a mere inconvenience. His movements were unhurried, his demeanor as composed as it had been when the ordeal began. To the stunned onlookers, it seemed as though nothing could shake this man. He caught the gaze of the crowd that had gathered, passengers, store patrons, and even the attendant who had crept outside once the coast was clear. His eyes carried a calm reassurance, a silent message that all was well now. He gave them a brief nod, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It's over. You're safe. The gas station attendant, still visibly shaken, approached cautiously. His voice trembled as he stammered, "Sir, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." The Marine shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Just dealt with the problem," he said simply. "But they've been terrorizing this place for weeks," the attendant continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "We've called the cops before, but by the time they get here, the bikers are already gone. And when they do show up, they don't do much. They count on that," the Marine interrupted, his tone steady but firm. "Bullies like them thrive on fear. They assume no one will stand up to them." The attendant's shoulders sagged slightly, relief mingling with guilt. "We were all too scared to do anything." The Marine softened his gaze. "Fear's natural. But you can't let it control you. Next time, call for help. Stand your ground when you can. People like that back off when they see strength." The attendant nodded, his face brightening just a little. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't been here." As the dust settled, the small crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves about what they had just witnessed. The young mother who had shielded her child earlier approached the Marine, her toddler now settled in her arms. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I was so scared for my son. I didn't know what to do." The Marine looked at her and nodded. "You did the right thing. You kept him safe. That's what matters." Her eyes glistened with gratitude. Are you some kind of soldier or something?" "Something like that," he replied with a faint smile. The elderly couple from earlier also shuffled forward, their faces a mixture of relief and admiration. The husband extended a hand, which the Marine shook firmly. "Son, I don't know who you are, but we're lucky you were here today," he said. The Marine gave a small chuckle. "Just passing through." "Well," the older man added, "you've done more good in one afternoon than most people do in a lifetime." Before climbing back into his truck, the Marine took one last look around the gas station. The people here would remember this day not just for the chaos, but for the way it had ended. The bikers, for all their bravado, had learned an unforgettable lesson: not everyone can be intimidated. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you least want to mess with. As he turned the ignition, the Marine spotted the gas station owner stepping out to survey the damage. The man's face was lined with worry as he inspected the broken shelves, scattered snacks, and the spilled gasoline near the pumps. The Marine rolled down his window. "You'll be all right," he called out. "Fix what you can, and don't let them come back here." The owner looked up, startled but grateful. "Thank you." "Really?" The Marine gave a small wave before pulling out onto the highway. The long stretch of road ahead was framed by open fields and the setting sun, its golden light casting a serene glow over the landscape. The Marine drove in silence, his thoughts as steady as the hum of the engine. He didn't dwell on the confrontation. For him, it was another moment in a long line of encounters where doing the right thing had come at a cost, but it was always worth it. What mattered wasn't the fight itself. It was the message left behind: courage in the face of intimidation, strength where it's least expected, and justice served to those who believed they were untouchable. He glanced at the rearview mirror one last time, the gas station now a speck in the distance. With a quiet exhale, he focused on the road ahead, ready for whatever came next. Because trouble had a way of finding him. And when it did, he'd be ready. The Marine's truck disappeared into the fading light, leaving the gas station behind. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, painted with the warm hues of a setting sun. As he drove, the rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to echo the events of the day, a day that would remain etched in the memories of those he had quietly protected. Back at the station, the people who had witnessed the confrontation stood in quiet reflection. The adrenaline of the moment had faded, replaced with a sense of awe and newfound respect for the man who had effortlessly turned the tide. For many of them, it wasn't just the biker's defeat that left an impact. It was the manner in which the Marine had handled it, calm, composed, and purposeful. The young mother sat in her car, her son now dozing peacefully in the back seat. She replayed the Marine's words in her mind, "You kept him safe. That's what matters." In those simple words, she found strength she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about doing what needed to be done, even when fear threatened to overwhelm you. The elderly couple shared a quiet moment together before starting their car. The husband, who had spent decades believing in doing what was right, felt a renewed sense of hope. "He reminded me of something," he said to his wife, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes, it's not about shouting the loudest. It's about standing your ground when it counts." His wife nodded, her hand resting on his. "And helping others along the way." The gas station attendant stood by the pumps, still trying to process what he had witnessed. His hands trembled slightly as he began cleaning up the scattered items and spilled gasoline. But amid the chaos, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. He thought about the Marine's calm demeanor, his steady gaze, and the way he had faced down danger without hesitation. The attendant resolved to be braver, to stop letting fear dictate his actions. "Next time," he muttered to himself, "I won't just hide behind the counter." Far down the highway, the Marine drove on, his mind calm and untroubled. He didn't consider himself a hero. What he had done was simply what he believed anyone with the skills and opportunity should do. He had learned long ago that true strength wasn't in loud displays or arrogant posturing. It was in discipline, in knowing when to act and how to act decisively. Strength wasn't about seeking conflict but about ending it swiftly, justly, and without unnecessary harm. As the truck rolled over the asphalt, the Marine reflected on the lessons his life had taught him. He had seen the worst humanity could offer, but he had also seen resilience, courage, and kindness. Those moments, however small, were what kept him going. Back at the gas station, the stories had already begun. The bystanders shared their accounts with anyone who would listen, their voices filled with awe and disbelief. "He didn't even flinch," one man said, shaking his head. "Those bikers didn't stand a chance." "And did you see how he moved?" another chimed in. "Like he'd done this 100 times before." The tale would spread beyond the station, becoming a local legend. The mysterious man who stood his ground against the gang would be remembered not just for his actions but for the quiet strength he exuded, a strength that left an indelible mark on everyone who crossed his path. As the night deepened, the witnesses went their separate ways, each carrying something more profound than mere admiration. They carried a lesson, one that would stay with them long after the details of the event faded. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should fear the most. It wasn't about fear in the traditional sense. It was about respect, the kind of respect that comes from recognizing true strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The Marine understood this truth deeply. And as he drove on, heading toward the next unknown chapter of his journey, he hoped that those he left behind would remember it, too. The highway stretched ahead, endless and open. The Marine adjusted his rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the fading gas station lights. He knew trouble would find him again, it always did. But that didn't bother him. He had faced worse, and he would face worse again. What mattered wasn't the trouble itself but how you handled it. Strength wasn't in the fight, it was in knowing you could handle the fight if it came. With that thought, he pressed the accelerator, merging with the flow of the road. The night embraced him, silent and steady, much like the man himself. And so he moved forward, a quiet force in a loud world, leaving behind lessons of courage, strength, and justice for those who had been lucky enough to witness his presence. The road stretched ahead like an endless ribbon, and the Marine found comfort in the solitude of the drive. His truck hummed steadily, a faithful companion on the open highway. Each mile carried him further from the scene at the gas station, but the impact of what had unfolded lingered in the air like a faint echo. He wasn't the type to dwell on events once they were resolved. The bikers were no longer a threat, and the people at the gas station would return to their routines, albeit with a renewed sense of security. That was enough for him. But the Marine couldn't ignore the way each encounter seemed to carve its mark, leaving behind lessons and reminders not just for others but for himself. He had seen the worst and the best of humanity over the years. The bikers, with their arrogance and aggression, were a reminder of the darkness that could thrive when unchecked. But the bystanders, though initially frozen by fear, had also shown resilience and gratitude once the danger passed. The Marine thought of the young mother, her trembling hands clutching her child. She had done what any parent would, protected her little one at all costs. Fear hadn't stopped her from taking action where it mattered most. Then there was the gas station attendant, whose timid demeanor belied the courage it took to step out after the chaos had subsided. That man had shown the first flickers of a bravery that might not have existed before today. And the elderly couple, steadfast and kind, their eyes reflecting a wisdom born from decades of challenges and triumphs. Their quiet presence had been a reminder that strength wasn't always about taking action, sometimes, it was about bearing witness with dignity. The Marine had long accepted the weight of his role in situations like these. He didn't seek out conflict, but when it found him, he couldn't ignore it. To turn a blind eye would be to betray everything he stood for. His life had taught him that strength came with responsibility. It wasn't about proving something to others, it was about using what you had to make the world a little better, even if only for a moment, even if only for a handful of people. The Marine's thoughts returned to a lesson he had learned years ago, one that guided him in every decision: you don't have to change the world all at once. Sometimes, it's enough to change one moment for someone. That was what had happened at the gas station. For those people, the fear they had carried was lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence that they could stand up to intimidation, that they weren't as helpless as they had believed. He didn't need recognition for what he had done. The true reward was knowing that his actions had left the world just a little better than it had been an hour earlier. Back at the gas station, the story of the Marine began to grow. The young mother, once home and safe, shared the experience with her family, her voice trembling with both fear and admiration as she recounted how the stranger had stood up to the bikers. The elderly couple, over dinner, spoke of the Marine with a tone of reverence. "You don't see that kind of courage every day," the husband said. The gas station attendant found himself inspired in unexpected ways. As he swept up the broken glass and cleaned the spill, he resolved to be more assertive, to take charge of his own life in ways he hadn't before. The Marine's presence had left behind more than just safety, it had planted seeds of courage and resilience in the hearts of those who had been there. The Marine's strength wasn't in loud proclamations or flashy heroics. It was in his quiet confidence, his unwavering calm, and his ability to act when action was needed. People often underestimated quiet strength. They mistook silence for weakness, composure for indifference. But those who witnessed the Marine that day would never make that mistake again. They had seen firsthand how powerful quiet strength could be. The Marine's truck climbed a gentle hill, and as he crested the top, the lights of a distant town flickered in the growing darkness. He didn't know where the road would lead him next, and he didn't need to. Trouble had a way of finding him, but he was always ready. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't wear a cape or seek glory. He was just a man who believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. As the stars began to dot the night sky, the Marine allowed himself a small smile. The world was far from perfect, but moments like today reminded him why he kept going. Sometimes, it wasn't about winning a war or saving the world. Sometimes, it was about making a stand when it mattered most, showing others that strength didn't have to be loud or flashy. And as the Marine drove on, the lesson he had left behind lingered in the minds of those he had helped: the quietest person in the room is often the one with the most power.